Good day, everybody. It's my pleasure to be with you and to participate in this wonderful conference. I wish I could be there in person with you, as I have on several occasions in the past, but at the last minute, my schedule changed. I send greetings to my many, many friends in Chile, and I again am honored with the opportunity to speak today. What I thought I would do for this gathering is look at the geopolitics of the world and talk a little bit about the maritime aspects of this as we walk around. So if I could have my first slide, please. So I will be a bit like this sailor and scan the horizon of the world and look at some of the current challenges. And as I walk through them, I will make a point of the maritime aspects. We'll begin in the Middle East. This is a long way from Chile, but it often feels like a point in the world where so much fire is in front of us. We all know the events of the last year: an attack on Israel on October 7th, a tragic humanitarian crisis here in the very small Gaza Strip. It is worth noting from a maritime perspective that one way the West, the United States, attempted to move additional aid to Gaza was through a floating dock arrangement, but it was challenged by the weather and by all of the actors ashore. Nonetheless, it's an example of how the sea remains important. The Israelis will continue to strike at the tunnel complex below Gaza, and they will continue to use the Mediterranean Sea as a maneuver space as they fight against the Hamas terrorists. But here's what all of us should be truly concerned about as mariners. It is the fact that another terrorist organization, the Houthis of Yemen, who are sponsored by Iran, have been able to effectively close the Red Sea and the Suez Canal to merchant traffic. They have done this with a combination of missile attacks, sabotage, and actually boarding large merchant ships and capturing them. They are like the Barbary pirates on the north coast of the African continent in the Mediterranean Sea 200 years ago. We still see this, and it is absolutely time for the international maritime community to respond to this, not only against the Houthis, but against Iran itself, if they do not pull back their sponsorship of this terrorist organization. Iran will continue to push against both Israel and the West, but it is important that on a maritime level, we ensure the Strait of Hormuz remains open and we reopen the Red Sea. Let's turn our focus to Ukraine, where again, we see the importance of the maritime theater here. Vladimir Putin has tried to choke the economy of Ukraine by closing the Black Sea. He has done this through bringing his combatants close to shore. Unfortunately for Russia, a third of the Black Sea fleet has now been sunk or badly damaged. It is an indicator of the new weapons of war that are going to influence maritime combat. All of us who focus on maritime security should be looking at the Black Sea in the days, weeks, and months ahead to learn about the future of maritime warfare, how our surface ships can protect themselves from drones and long-range cruise missiles, and the increased use of artificial intelligence to coordinate all of these attacks. Sanctions have been applied against Russia. There's a significant maritime component to them, yet Russia has been able to overcome many of these sanctions by building a shadow fleet that operates quite literally in the shadows, turning off their AIS and going dark while moving oil and gas. That must be addressed. The Ukrainians will continue to prosecute this war ashore, and we'll see what the future holds. Probably a negotiation at some point fairly soon. But the lessons of what has occurred in the Black Sea from a maritime perspective and in terms of enforcing maritime sanctions globally will continue to be studied and of extreme importance. NATO has emerged even stronger from this conflict, and its maritime capabilities will continue to be vital. Putin, however, will continue this war until he is forced to a negotiation. Let's hope that happens in 2025, but he has been forced already to pull the Black Sea fleet back, far back from the shores of Ukraine because of the dangers of the warfare that has occurred. We should also be concerned at sea of Putin's ability to go after undersea pipelines and fiber optic cables. This potential to attack critical flow of oil, gas, and information is a maritime problem in many ways. Cyber, of course, is part of this, and in particular, protecting the electric grid of all of our countries underpins our ability to operate our maritime fleets. Putin will continue to seek assistance from rogue nations like North Korea, and he will also attempt to consolidate military relationships with China. At the bottom right is a Chinese warship and a Russian warship operating together, not where you might expect it in the North Pacific. That photograph was taken in the Baltic Sea, in the heart of Europe. So to conclude on Ukraine, it is hard to predict where this will end. My guess is that Putin will end up in control of about 20% of Ukraine, the area between those gold circles that you see on the right side of the screen. But the rest of Ukraine, the 80% to the west, will have a path ultimately to NATO, the European Union, and reconstruction. For us as mariners and maritime strategists, there is much to learn from what occurred on the Black Sea during this conflict. So finally, a few thoughts on China, which in every sense is emerging as a strong, indeed a maritime superpower. This is because of their geography. China has very few natural resources and therefore will seek control of the seas to and from China. One Belt, One Road has a land route, which you see in red, but very much depends on the seas, which you see in blue. China will continue to expand its naval fleet, which is now the largest in the world, 330 warships, United States about 290. Those of the United States are bigger, there is more experience operating them, there are nuclear aircraft carriers, but China's numbers continue to rise. Bottom right, their use of the oceans in a maritime context is powerful, and bottom left, they're building artificial islands. They build them here in the large South China Sea. That area inside the red dotted lines is half the size of the United States of America. It's an enormous body of water. China claims it as territorial seas, and as a result has conflicts with many of the nations around the South China Sea littoral, but particularly the Philippines. Bottom right is the flag of the Philippines, a treaty ally of the United States, which is in a real dispute with China. And China's fleet continues to grow in both capability and experience. That fleet also has the potential to create a blockade around Taiwan. And Taiwan's military is brave, and I think they will fight, but they are not as yet fully up to strength. What China could do is blockade the island, they could invade the island, they could bombard the island. I think those are unlikely events, and I think that President Xi will not attack Taiwan unless Taiwan declares independence. I don't think they will do so, but for the moment, from a maritime perspective, we have to look at this as a significant potential hotspot alongside the South China Sea itself. So this, I think, will be the plan of Taiwan. And by the way, that photograph with the lion and the porcupine is not Photoshop. Occasionally, a lion decides it will try and eat a porcupine. The porcupine wins. The porcupine has the capability to deter and defend itself from the lion. To do that, Taiwan will need not only the weapons you see on the left, cruise missiles, air defense, cyber. Taiwan will need capable naval assets. That will be part of their plan. And how does it come out between the United States and China? Well, several years ago, I wrote the book you see there, 2034, a novel of the next World War. It's fiction. It's set 10 years in the future, and I wrote it as cautionary fiction to make a point of how devastating it would be for both the United States and China and the world if these two nations stumble into a conflict. However, I am hopeful that we can end up like the photograph you see. Look closely at that warship. It's a Chinese combatant, obviously, but look upper left. It's flying the flag of the United States of America. Why? Well, all of the members of the audience who have been captains of warships will know that when a warship arrives for a goodwill port visit in a foreign capital, that warship will fly the flag of that nation. I have done that pulling into ports in Chile many times over, flown the flag of Chile as a mark of respect. This photograph was taken only 4 years ago, just before the pandemic, when a Chinese warship made a goodwill port visit to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And look at the crowd. You see the large Chinese flag, but look bottom right. The crowd has both Chinese and American flags. These are Chinese Americans greeting this warship. I think we can arrive at this modus vivendi. It's a Latin phrase that means a way of living together. I think the US and China can arrive at this, but in order to do so, we need to come to understandings about the maritime world. China's claims of owning the South China Sea, this vast body of water, the size of the Gulf of Mexico, is not supportable by international law or operations. An attack on Taiwan is going to shatter global relations. We can avoid all of those eventualities, but it will require dialogue, engagement, finding zones of cooperation in trade, in fighting climate challenges, in working together in disaster relief. All of these are potential zones of cooperation, and maritime work together could be one of those. Finally, a word about Latin America. I worry about Venezuela. I worry about Nicolas Maduro, and I worry about his claims of control over his neighbor, Guyana. This is a challenge for the entire hemisphere. And I think over time there will have to be a change in Venezuela itself in order to bring that nation back into full diplomatic relations across the hemisphere. And certainly the idea that Venezuela could invade Guyana and conquer it, much as Putin is trying to do in Ukraine, must not be allowed. And finally, a word about Haiti, the most tortured, poorest country in our hemisphere, where, as the Chileans in the audience will well know, Chile and Brazil led an important peacekeeping force there for almost a decade. That force left, thinking that Haiti would recover, and now Haiti has fallen back into real chaos. Just looking at that map, you can understand this is a maritime challenge as well as one on the ground. Today, there are peacekeepers from Kenya. You see their flag there and some of them. I hope over time the international community can stabilize this tragic nation. Doing so will require real maritime engagement. And I remember on my first command, USS Barry, in the 1990s, my very first operation before heading to the Balkans, before heading to the Middle East, my first operation was here in the Americas off the coast of Haiti. And then finally, this beautiful nation of Chile, which is hosting this conference. You have an extraordinary and beautiful country, a coastline that is the envy of the world, deep natural resources. You have significant and strong trading relationships with China and with the United States. I look at that as a point of real importance and a vitally good point, because we need the nations of Latin America to be able to work both with China and with the United States. And over time, I hope that as we have exercises like RIMPAC, and we have further discussions of trade agreements in the Pacific, we can find ways to find these zones of cooperation with China. Chile, I think, can be a big part of all of that. So let me conclude, if I may, with a couple of thoughts about the importance of this maritime world that we are exploring at ExpoNaval. Number one, the oceans matter deeply. I don't need to tell this audience that, but our job as mariners and maritime strategists and naval officers and commercial mariners, our job is to make sure the world understands how important the oceans are. And allowing a terrorist organization like the Houthis to simply cut off a vital sea lane of communication, effectively closing the Suez Canal to much of the merchant shipping, is unacceptable. Number two, there will be great power competition on the oceans. Not only US and China, as we've discussed, but NATO in the Black Sea, Russia in the North Pacific, North Korea operating its fleet, such as it is, against South Korea. All around the world, and we touched on several of these, the maritime component of great power competition is real and it is present. We must understand that as we go forward. And third and final thought, as I conclude this presentation, is the opposite of great power competition and war at sea. The opposite is cooperation. We must seek ways to cooperate with each other at sea. I would put climate at the top of the list. The importance of the oceans, which are the true lungs of the earth, is vital. We need oceans that are free from plastics and oil spills and piracy and fisheries illegalities. all of the things that can destroy the health of this 70% is something we should all be able to agree on and cooperate to control. That cooperation goes from the biggest nations like China and the United States to very small nations in Central America and the Middle East, and to mid-sized powers like Chile, which has one of the longest and most important maritime traditions in the world. I salute you. I thank you for allowing me to present. I hope my thoughts have been useful. Gracias por su atención. Es un gran placer para mí de estar aquí con todos. Thank you.